Welcome to a football show, Monday edition, 3 p.m. edition, brought to you by Sinkers Beverages. My name is Braden Gall, and that is Paul Kuharsky of paulkuharsky.com, the Paul Kuharsky podcast, and a variety of other places you can hear him talking and tweeting and posting. How are you, Paul? Good to see you, sir.
I'm very well, thanks.
Well, we got a lot of stuff to do today because we've got Cut Down Day coming on Tuesday. We've got some announcements for you guys who are watching the show already. I've already seen some of you guys in the comments already if you want to get in. We are working on getting it up and live on the Twitter machine as we speak. There's some errors occurring in that right now, so we'll get to that. But we are live on YouTube and Facebook, so if you are watching, please give us a thumbs up, subscribe, share the product, get some folks in. Again, we've got some announcements coming up here in just a minute. We've got Cut Down Day coming tomorrow, Paul. We've got a third preseason game that showed us a little bit more of the starting group for the Tennessee Titans. What do these decisions from the coaching staff in the front office about the roster tell us about what they want their team to be? I think that's a really interesting angle to all of this. Certainly we'll make some predictions on some of the final players that will be available. Obviously the offense, we'll talk about that because they finished very well in the preseason. Didn't always match up to what we saw in practice, but the quarterback played very well. The scheme looked really good. The offensive line has made progress. So lots of stuff to get to. And I know you had some thoughts. Paul Kuharsky podcast. Make sure you check that out everywhere you get your podcasts. I know you had some thoughts on the Steve McNair documentary. I had a chance to watch it over the weekend. Not a ton of new information, but a few tidbits there. So we can kind of get into that a little bit later on. Otherwise, injuries. Let's start there first before we get to the announcements. We'll have some stuff for you guys in a second, trying to let everybody kind of matriculate into the broadcast here. But injuries, Chance Campbell, Paul, as of today with Brian Callahan's press conference, I know you were there. Chance Campbell out for the season, and that's now two, I guess, potential rosterable linebackers who are now out for the season. And that position without Gray right now, Cedric Gray, thinner and thinner by the game, it seems.
I don't know that Garrett Wallow was rosterable linebacker, but certainly Chance was. And look, he's an injury-prone guy. We knew that. He missed his rookie season with a knee injury. He played 4 games the second season because of the knee injury or injuries, and now he misses his third season with the injury. It doesn't bode well for the future of his career. And now the Titans have cut 9 guys in total today.
Breaking news.
So, and it's nobody you wouldn't expect to go on a day like today.
John Gall, no relation, by the way. Shout out to you, John. Says Thomas Rush is cut. I cannot confirm that, Paul. Hopefully,
no, they have cut 9 guys. I'm just having trouble getting it called up on my damn phone. So
right,
if you give me a second, I'll have them.
How about this? You go through the list.
Here's the list. JoJo Domann waived injured, so he comes back to the Titans if he's unclaimed, and then they have to injury settle with him, which amounts to it's a 4-week injury. We have to pay you 4 weeks of your time. You agree, we agree, and that's done. If we can't agree, you have to be on our injured reserve until you're healthy, and we have to pay you during that. So JoJo Domann, the linebacker, Trayshawn Harrison, the wide receiver, both waived injured. Brian Dooley, offensive tackle, very much the last man in that group, gone. Tay Gowan, cornerback, also terrible. Linebacker, Michael Jones, who was just recently added. Linebacker Thomas Rush didn't make a play, I don't think. Wide receiver Sam Schnee, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He was very much the last wide receiver. Tight end Steven Stelanos, who actually made a couple plays. And punter Ty Zentner, who was very much here to fill in for Ryan Stonehouse while he got his leg back, which we saw he got his leg back as he punted twice in the final preseason game, which was their plan for him all along. So that's the first round of cuts, 9 guys gone today.
And we heard Rand Carthon a lot during the broadcast talking about how active they've been at studying other rosters and they're prepared to go make some offers. So I had 44 names. I'll ask you this in a second, Paul. I had 44 names written down as quote unquote locks. That leaves 9 spots available. Not one of those 9 names that you just mentioned. Domann, Harrison, Jones, Schnee, I guess. Zentner, Stalianos, Rush, Gowan, or Dooley. Not one of them did I have them even in the other group list. There's a handful of names here So again, that's why they give them the chance to go get jobs earlier, I guess, than everybody else. So there you have that. The injuries. All right, so let's do some quick announcements here. Good to see you guys all. Stoney Keeley, of course, very disappointed about the Brian Dooley cut. Jake's in the house as well, as is Nick. So we do appreciate you guys. If you want to jump in and ask questions, we will answer those coming up in a little bit. Quickly, some announcements here. So a football show on Monday is going to move to 3 p.m. I sort of threw that out there on Twitter. We're going to have the whole plan here for the new fall lineup is going to be to give you guys opportunities to watch fresh new content from a lot of different folks from in the afternoon, roughly 3 to 5. That is 3 to 5 p.m. That is after all the Titans practices and availabilities and locker rooms and press conferences. Just want to get all that stuff out of there for your afternoon drive home and your evening at home. We're going to have a football show at 3 p.m. on Mondays. Audible will come up after that. We're going to have the Hot Read podcast. More on that in just a second. We'll have the Hot Read podcast on Tuesdays at 4 o'clock, as well as Fridays at 4 o'clock. I am really excited to announce I get to do an SEC football show live on this platform at 3 o'clock on Wednesdays with Stephen Godfrey, who has been one of the best investigative reporters in SEC and college football, lives in Nashville, and he's going to be my co-host on that show for the football season. So very excited about SEC football live. I get to, you know me, Paul, I get to talk college football as well. So we're doing that on Wednesdays at 3 o'clock. Very excited about that, followed by Music City Audible, of course, with Justin Mello, Justin Graver coming up as well. And then the Paul Kuharsky podcast takes center stage on Thursday afternoon as well. We'll have the Gold Standard podcast, which is about the Nashville Predators, live on YouTube on Wednesday mornings. And of course, Paul, you might have some plans for everybody on Sundays this season as well. What do you got?
Yeah, my Sunday night thing will be broader now. So I'll come up from the locker room at a home or away game, bang out my column, and then go live from the press box there. So a lot of people, I think, do initial reaction stuff, but mine will be more considered with members chiming in on my voicemail line. So that'll be a regular Sunday night feature from the press box, which is why I'm the last guy out of the press box virtually every night, straggling out of the press box from a 1 o'clock game at 9 o'clock.
Who's
1 o'clock Eastern game at 9 o'clock.
And the Titans personnel are long gone, right? Like they're out of there. Like
no, usually at a home game, I'm there with Dwight Spradlin.
Shout out,
who does his statistical work and could probably do it until midnight if he wanted to, and he might stay there that much longer than I do. But we're usually the last two ones.
All right.
At a visiting press box, I'm often the last guy. At Tottenham Hotspur last year, I was the last guy that left the building from the whole press thing. And to be honest, I couldn't get the door to close behind me. And Tottenham Hotspur is kind of in the middle of a neighborhood. It's kind of a like brand new Wrigley or Fenway.
Yeah.
So I'm looking around to make sure that people don't see that the door's not closing, because anybody in the neighborhood could have walked right into the press lounge, et cetera, in the middle of that neighborhood.
Unlike any NFL stadium or any stadium in Nashville of any kind, soccer stadiums in Europe and especially in London, like no parking, very accessible to the neighborhood. So,
well, that's going to be just like Nashville soon with the no parking.
Well, it's already like that. There's no question about that. Okay, so a couple other things here, and on the hot read, of course, today, and this goes without saying, we said this on Thursday, but congrats to Zach for the job he's done, working hard. Also, congrats to Easton Freeze for the work he has done, building the Hot Read podcast. He announced today about his new adventure and where he's going to be headed. So he's moving on from the Hot Read podcast, but we are excited. Stoney Keeley and JT, still don't know how to say his last name. JT and Stoney are going to be hosting.
Runke, maybe?
Runke is how to say it. I'm only kidding, giving him a hard time. But Stoney and JT, the people of the internet, Paul, have been clamoring for Stoney and JT to get together more often.
Have they been clamoring?
That's what they tell me. That's what they tell me.
Who? The people of the internet or Stoney and JT?
I think both of them. But all of the above. So the two of them will be on Tuesdays and Fridays at 4 o'clock. Again, me and Godfrey on for college football and the SEC in particular on Wednesdays. You got the Paul Kuharsky podcast Sunday nights after games, and then again on Thursdays. And of course, we've got a football show. There's some more plans still in the works for a football show. A second episode. We got some more stuff to kind of figure out there. We also have some Predators news that's coming very, very soon. We're going to make a big announcement about the Preds as well. So make sure you, again, stay tuned. All the shows, we're going to have you covered from a football standpoint, all up and down the dial here. But Obviously, it goes without saying, special thanks to Sinkers Beverages for their support through all of this transition. I'm very excited about what the next chapter is going to look like and how the fall is going to play out. We got a lot of great people doing great work, and very excited about Sinkers Beverages. Make sure you swing by. Vote for Best of Nashville, by the way. They've won 3 straight years, best liquor store in Nashville. I know they want your vote this year for 2024. So if you want to go to the Nashville scene, go sign up and vote for Sinkers Beverages. Bluegrass Beverages up in Hendersonville as well. Make sure you check them out. So a lot of stuff planned for you guys this fall. That's some of the announcements. We've got more coming next week, and then more after that the week after that. So
the guy can't stop announcing stuff.
I know, it's my problem. But you know what? That's what happens. Okay, so we covered the injuries, we covered the cuts. I just want to ask a strategy question of you, Paul, and sort of your perception of the new regime and the front office. Like, is there anything that you think we can learn about what they view their team to be, what they want to be as a football team? If they were to keep a 4th running back or a 4th tight end or an extra receiver or a middle linebackers, is there anything in the decision-making process itself that you think fans can glean from what this organization wants to be? Or is it just based on who's good and where do they have some injuries?
Yeah, I don't think there's a lot. I mean, I think what we could glean is what Brian Callahan has told us is that they're not going to check boxes about numbers. I mean, there are minimum numbers, and they're going to have to keep them. They're going to have to keep a couple guys on the defensive line in Bohanna and maybe McClendon, whose injury might be the most long-term injury that they have. And maybe he is the one legitimate IR candidate. You could put as many as 2 guys on IR tomorrow with your cut moves that could be recall guys, count against your 8 for the season. That's a new rule. You don't have to put them on your roster for 24 hours like you used to have to do, make a side deal with the guy that you're going to pick back up. But outside of those 2 last defensive linemen, could be Abdullah Anderson. I don't think so. But outside of those guys, they're not going to check boxes to keep numbers because everything else is stocked enough. So then, to me, it's the last 6 guys on the roster probably that they say they're going to keep the best 6 football players. And so, that leads to the back end inside linebackers. That leads to not as many outside linebackers, I think. To me, that opens the door for Hassan Haskins. I don't think many of us know that much about special teams or care that much about special teams. To me, when I watch special teams, I frequently have not seen eye-popping stuff from guys like Luke Gifford, who they tell you are special teams aces. I do see eye-popping stuff from Hassan Haskins when I watch special teams. I could say that guy right there is doing stuff that everybody else is not doing, Hassan Haskins. I think he's worth keeping as a special teams ace when I look at the last 6 guys on the roster and don't find them to be very good. By the way, we all think these last 6 guys are better than they are because we've all been watching them and discussing them relentlessly because they are the guys who have been worth debating for the last 10 days or whatever. And some of them are going to make the roster tomorrow, and then they'll be off the roster a day later when they make some claims off IR at the 7th spot. So I think that's what we're told the most about is their approach here, where they're intending to keep the 6 best football players. And, whether they think Malik Willis is one of those guys or not, he's not, and the like.
Agree. Nick says, look for the Titans to be very active with players being cut by other teams. I tend to
Everybody always says that. Very active equals 3 guys. Semi-active equals 2 guys. I'd be surprised if it's much more than that because there's not as much good stuff that comes out on the waiver wire as people expect. And then they've got 6 teams in front of them. If something great hits, they need an outside linebacker. Well, if a great outside linebacker, great in the context of cuts comes out, well, it's not going to make it to 7.
Yeah. I'm also curious because I know, and you talked about this on your show on Thursday. Everybody go check it out. Paul Kuharsky podcast, rate, review, and subscribe. Phillips, Kinsey, and Kearis Jackson, possibly the 3 guys battling for what may or may not be a spot on the roster. All 3 of them hurt. Bryce Oliver's had the best 2-week run here, but he's probably not making the team. There's a really good chance and a lot of momentum around David Martin Robinson. And from what I understand, the Seahawks were extremely impressed with David Martin Robinson when they practiced against him. So again, if they keep a sixth receiver on top of DeAndre Hopkins, making it 7, does that tell you something about the health of Hopkins and that maybe he's out longer, or is that just they think he's a good enough player to help them, or do you think they're at 6 at wide receiver and they're going to, to me, a 4th tight end and a 4th running back, especially Haskins, who can catch passes pretty well and pick up the blitz, it seems like those 2 pieces could supplement the passing game if they needed a piece there.
Well, I don't think the 6th wide receivers getting a lot of action in a regular game at wide receiver. So I don't think the Hopkins thing factors in a lot unless it's much longer term and they're talking optimistically about him. So I don't think that's a factor in keeping a 7th. I think those 3 guys are pretty similar and all disadvantaged at being primarily slot receivers when you've already got Boyd and Jaquan Jackson. So, for a while I was thinking Kuharsky Jackson because of his return ability, but then he didn't get to play in this last game with with a knee bruise. I don't know who the second returner is going to be, but I think Phillips is
Eric Gare?
Well, I didn't have him on either, but I think maybe his case is getting stronger because I don't know who it is. Or maybe you just don't have one, but you got to put 2 guys back on that kickoff. And so who's the second guy back? Maybe it's Haskins.
How much? So I think punt return, there's only 1 guy back.
Yeah.
With kick return, is it possible that, they've said Tajay Spears and Treylon Burks could be options.
Yeah. I'd put Spears back there and not make a decision based on it. I think David Martin Robinson now is a foregone conclusion. He's on. I think a 7th receiver is a stretch. Bryce Oliver has been very good 3rd-team receiver throughout camp with the great connection with Malik Willis. I don't know that he's caught a pass from Will Levis the entire time. And so, if you're a very good 3rd-team receiver and you haven't caught a pass from the 1st-team quarterback, it doesn't do much for your case. I think he's a lock for the practice squad. I don't think, people are looking to jump on him. Brian Callahan's very consciously said, and this is true, you tend to think your guys are more valued by other teams than they are. Everybody's got a guy who's been a good 3rd-team receiver for them that they want on their practice squad. And it's not like somebody could take Bryce Oliver for their practice squad. They have to take him for their 53. And most people have 53 they want.
It does feel like the players, like Julius Chestnut's been running a lot as the 3rd back. You've got DMR running a lot as the 4th tight end. Thomas Odukoya, I was on the Thomas Odukoya bandwagon, meaning ahead of DMR up until middle of last week. I thought Martin Robinson started making more plays. And then in the game, if you watch Odukoya outside of the really awesome, excellent effort play on special teams to end the first half, basically, he missed a few blocks. It wasn't a great game for 89. I thought 88 was the better player, so I might be coming around on that. I think you're right. It's foregone.
It's unfortunate for Odukoya that he still got this international exemption. So they put him on the practice squad with the international exemption to get him as the 17th guy. But then if one of the 3 tight ends gets hurt, they can't call him up immediately. You have to turn him into a regular practice squad player, and then you have to wait 3 weeks before he's eligible to be called up. So the nice thing to do would be to take away the exemption and to make him one of the 16 practice squatters so that he's immediately eligible to be called up if you need something.
But again, let's use Jalen Harrell as an example as well. Like when Jalen Harrell consistently is getting reps with starting defenses, you have to assume that he's not the 3rd-team guy, right? Like he's
a lock. And
he's a lock, right? So.
Yeah, and the guy that's the big question mark there, who I think makes the roster, is Rashad Weaver, who didn't have a stat. Condre Diggs didn't have a stat. Amani Hooker didn't have a stat in this last preseason game. Well, their safeties, you like for them not to be making tackles, right? They didn't have interceptions or passes defense. But Weaver did not have a stat in that game yesterday, and he played 19 defensive snaps and 4 special team snaps. He's not done a lot with a lot of opportunity. The Arden Key suspension's not happening. That's a good development for the Titans, obviously. But I don't think Caleb Murphy's been very good either. And he's like a designated pass rusher. Weaver, quote unquote, can do more, but he doesn't do much when he's on the field. That's a guy you'd like to replace with a waiver wire claim. Yeah. Is there somebody good enough?
I think it's also system driven. Like they were asking him to drop some weight, which he did, and they're asking him to do more stuff in coverage with Jalen Harrell.
You can't ask him to cover. You can't ask Weaver to cover.
No, he can't do it. I agree. And Harrell's been the better all around player, I think, for most of the camp, and I think he fits in. I do think they have to keep somebody though. I don't think it's I mean, Caleb
I'd
Murphy,
keep
Shane
4,
Ray, Duke.
and I'd keep 4, and they wouldn't keep any of those guys. I mean, Shane Ray flashed to me early on, and got a little better towards the end, but really kind of disappeared.
Okay.
He hasn't played in 5 years. Caleb Murphy, to me, would go back to the practice squad as a project pass rusher, and so I would keep, the starting 2, Harold Landry, Arden Key. I'd keep Harrell, and I would keep Weaver. And I don't know that anybody's pressing for a 5th spot there, and I wouldn't force
it. Simmons, Sweat, Day, Coburn, McClendon, like you said, I don't know about that position either. We know that there's probably.
I mean, I think you've got to keep numbers there. So I
agree.
think Bohannon's in play and McClendon's in play for numbers, and I think Eiton's automatic for the practice squad.
Yep, I agree with that. I do think Anderson had some nice moments in practice last week and solid in the game. I know he's a late signing, but maybe he did enough to earn his way on. At linebacker now, without Chance Campbell, of course, you've got Murray, Gibbons, Williams, Gray, who we don't know when he's going to be hurt, or back, but I know he was working on the side there, and Otis Reese will be coming out of protocol soon. I assume with the Campbell injury, that guarantees Otis Reese a spot maybe on the team. You said this on your show, and I think this is probably the most important angle for the linebacker conversation, because I think this is one of their, if not their worst position, I think it's their worst. It might be at least one of. If you're going to use Adams and you're going to use Diggs and you're going to use Molden, although Molden banged up as well, if you're going to use all these different pieces, you're going to be creative and you're going to be in what do they call it, heavy nickel and dime. You don't have to have Luke Gifford on the field all the time, or sorry, Jack Gibbons on the field all the time. See, they're the same player.
Yeah, the second starting inside linebacker is on the field half the time. Not even.
I mean, he makes a lot of tackles 7 and 8 yards downfield, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but that's just every time you see his number making a tackle, it's after a 7 or 8 yard gain, and that's not acceptable with Ferdinand Wilson. The 5th and 6th cornerback are.
So let's just stick it inside linebacker for a second. Gifford, we've completely forgotten about because he hasn't been out there because he's been concussed. It's been a relatively long concussion recovery. I don't know, 3.5, maybe 4 weeks. Maybe he's in play because they like him on special teams. He's also a $2 million player. You can save 1.9 the minute you cut him. They've got a lot of cap money, but that's free money there also if you're weighing him against Reese or Gray. And Gray shoulder is some kind of nerve thing. Maybe he's a 4-week injury that you put on IR. I don't know.
Nick says Weaver is not worth a spot at all. What has he done to earn it? I mean, look, I think he's put a lot of work in.
Who else is earning it?
But
who else is earning it is the question.
Caleb Murphy had a couple of nice moments in the first game against the Niners, but that's about it. 5th and 6th corner. Eric Garrett, Trey Avery, Caleb Farley, and Gabe Judy Lolly. I don't know what they're going to do at that position, but
Gabe Judy Lolly, to me, I mean, he didn't play well yesterday, but I think his body of work has been very good. I think he should be on the team. I think Avery does a lot of gunning, but I think he can find gunning replacements on special teams. To me, Garrar would be the next one. Farley is like anybody who's putting Farley on the team is just into the comeback story after everything he's been through. Farley has no place on this team. Gowan's already gone. Javier is the worst player on the 91-man roster in my eyes.
Agreed. So it sounds like Gabe Judy Lolly and Avery are your 2, but maybe Avery's the 6th one who gets
Avery. I cut as the
Gare,
6th.
okay.
I kept 5. I kept 5. Garrett is my closest, maybe.
Okay.
But look, Garrett is a slot, right? And they've got McCreary as a slot. Brownlee can play slot. And then again, we're talking about all these variations of nickel where Adams would be at nickel, where Molden could be at nickel.
Agree.
Big nickel and dime.
Hooker, Diggs, Molden, Adams, 5th safety, Matthew Jackson. Is that the direction they go?
Close, but out for me.
Okay, I'm kind of with you on that one. All right, let's go back to the offensive line because I don't think there's really a lot of debate on the offense in general. Malik Willis is just going to be a decision they make. I don't think he has done anything to deserve a roster spot, but I could see them keeping him.
Either.
I think we know it's Chig, Wiley, Vanette, and DMR. I think it's probably Spears, Pollard, Chestnut, and Haskins because you have the space there. But the offensive line is the interesting one. I think there are 8 that are locked in here. Latham, Skoronski, Cushenberry, Brunskill, Radens, NPF, Duncan, and Rupchich, I think are the 8 that I've got locked in. And then it comes down to whether it's Spencer, Simmons, Christian, Watson, Ojukwu. It's probably one, maybe a second one of those guys, I suppose.
Yeah, so I've changed my mind here. I had Christian last week. Christian played with the threes in this game.
Yeah.
And I've switched to Spencer. Now, Spencer in the second to last game really made a couple plays that concerned me. I talked about this a little with Blake Bedingfield, the resident scout who writes at my site. He seems to like Spencer. He likes Simmons. Also, Simmons didn't play in this game. He got dinged up last week. I'm keeping Spencer as my last one. I wish it was a tackle, but a Christian, I think, is stiff, and he's got a lot of experience. Watson also didn't play in this game. I don't know if he's hurt or not. Ojukwu, I think, fell far, maybe bounced back a little bit at the end. Dooley's already gone. I think the better option is Spencer or Simmons, and I'm going with Spencer.
I think what's interesting is if they keep Jaron Christian or a Shane Ray type, it's clear that they're valuing the veteran experience with those two guys. So just keep it. Just again, that's something to keep an eye on if they go that direction. I don't think they do either. And with all due respect to Stoney Keeley, Ojukwu, he might be the last one cut. Like he might be 54 on the team potentially.
He should have a better latch on a spot for a guy that had all spring and at least 2 weeks of camp where he was the right tackle. And for him to have fallen to third team in the second preseason game, that's a precipitous plunge.
So I want to talk offense here, PK, with you. Make sure you go to paulkuharsky.com, check out the website. Great article about Denard Wilson and sort of his background, so make sure you go check that out. Again, you got the podcast on Sunday nights after games and, of course, on Thursdays as well. You're going to get all kinds of great support from Sinkers Beverages over here in East Nashville, 3-time liquor store of the year. Make sure you sign up for the in-crowd. They've got events. They've got allocations. They've got all kinds of deals they put through that list of folks only. So it's sort of like, it's a rewards group. So sign up for the in-crowd. And, of course, follow them on the socials as well. You'll get releases of, hey, we're putting out these bourbons or we're putting out this or we got a special on that. Just follow them on the socials. They'll take care of you there. And, of course, their sister store serving Hendersonville for over 50 years, Bluegrass Beverages. They have history and experience, and they got the skins on the wall with the awards 3 straight years, Liquor Store of the Year. Go vote on them, of course, for best of. I want to start with the offensive line, though, because we'll get to Levis and the offense and the scheme and everything and how it looked against the Saints. But I do think one of the things that I've settled on, I think, about this group, I think it's good, to your point about Ojukwu. I think it is good, and it is a great sign that Nicholas Petit-Frere and Dylan Radins, guys with pedigree in terms of talent where they were drafted, have solidified those 2 spots because it means Bill Callahan has done the work to get them in. I think both of those guys deserve credit for sort of going through the circuitous routes they've gone through to get to the starting spots today. It also is very clear that the 2 first-round picks the last 2 years are worthy of those picks, at least for now, and are your starting guys. Never waffled either of those 2 players. And when you watch them run the football, Paul, or with the screen game, they are good right now. And I've said this for the show for a month and a half now. They are going to be a much better running team with that group than the pass sets. They're going to have some problems in pass pro because that's just the nature of the position. But they played pretty well against the Saints. They've come a long way. And I think you could argue this is the group that has developed the most from start of camp to today.
Well, I loved the screens in this game. I love what Callahan said today about screens being a big feature for them. I think screens take a lot of mechanics going on together, right? Those offensive linemen can't leave early. This shows some timing and intelligence on their part, things working. Cushenberry, Radins, and especially Skoronski were all very good on those 3 screens that worked. 2 of them in the first drive to Vanette and to Pollard that made things work on the first scoring drive. That was very good, where they didn't even get into a 3rd down, and they had seven first downs. So I thought that was good. I'm going to disagree with you a little bit, excuse me, on the solidifying of the right side of the line. I mean, I think the right guys have ended up there in Radins and NPF. I was up on NPF through the whole offseason when he was out and all of that. I wrote, don't forget about NPF, that it's crazy to be dismissive of him because of last year, which was a disaster and a wash, but isn't the kind of thing that you should throw a guy away based on. But they had no competition. I mean, once Sadiq Charles decided to retire, there's nobody to push for the right guard spot, really. It was almost a crowning moment for Radins. And we talked about how far Ojukwu fell on his own merits, not on NPF. I don't think coming in there and banging him over the head and taking it away from him, though effectively that's what he did. But you can't fix this whole line in one go round. I think they've done well. Latham looks like a good pick. Kuharsky in his second year, they made a big move to get Cushenberry with big money. There's only so much they can do. And I think they're going to be okay / fine on the right side with those two guys. But it's not like they had to really hold off some kind of stampede of good things. They're better coached. They're in a better scheme. They've got better skill players who are going to work off what they do. They're all of that stuff. But they also had great opportunity.
Let me ask you about the screen thing real fast, just from a strategy standpoint. Like they worked on it in practice and it looked good in practice. I'm curious if you think, like, why show that in game 3? Is it you have to blend why you want to work on something and actually giving your offense a chance to get reps in live situation, even if you're going against the twos for the Saints. But how much do you want to show that? Like, it's not like they can come out and run a bunch of screens against the Bears. I mean, does that question make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, but I think that's like the Vrabel extreme. Like, we're gonna not do anything. And I think Callahan's like, we're playing football and screens are part of football. And, it's no huge surprise when we get to Chicago that we're going to run some screens. If you look at what we did in Cincinnati with Joe Mixon, we ran screens and, that's what we're going to do. And he said we needed to run. We needed to do it to get those guys out, to get the timing down, to get the ball in some people's hands and to have Will throw it and stuff. So it seems very commonsensical to me.
So I think, and the screens goes with this. I think, again, I'll repeat this. I think the offensive line, if you want to run the football, and they've done a lot of creative stuff with, like, each time you look at a run play that's worked, it's two different guys that have pulled, right? Like, one time it's Kuharsky and Latham I think he pulled play side on a pitch in the first game. They're doing a lot of interesting stuff. And I think they're going to be very good at running the football with Pollard and Spears. And then if you put in Chestnut and Haskins as well. So I think that's a positive development in general. They're going to be a better rushing team, a more diverse rushing team, let's say,
certainly,
than last year. I think the other thing that I've sort of settled on through this whole process is I think the play calling, as much as it can prove itself to date, has been impressive. I thought the scheme in practice was very good on Wednesday when Levis was kind of half and half. I thought the scheme has been very good so far in terms of what Brian Callahan, for the first time in his career, is doing, calling plays. Like, I think they are doing unique and creative and interesting things. Lots of pre-snap motion. Like, it's a lot of stuff. And I think it's been as advertised as much as you can learn to date about a play caller before there's actual games.
Yeah, I think so too. The one thing that I took great interest in the two series with the first team offense, on first down, they passed 5 times. They ran 5 times. And he talked about wanting to be 50-50. But in 1st and 10, they passed 5 times and they ran 3 times. And I think we'd be hard pressed to find 8 plays of 1st and 10 for the Mike Vrabel Titans where they passed 5 times and ran 3 times. So, I mean, look, it's a preseason game against second string defense and all of that. You can pick and choose what's meaningful and what's not. I find that to be meaningful. I find that to be aggressive. I find that to be exceedingly unpredictable. And look, I think one of the biggest storylines early, Braden, it hasn't been a storyline during training camp and during the preseason because Derrick Henry hasn't played. And I think the Titans, as they get their footing with the pass game, are probably going to be a little bit more Pollard and Spears reliant in the first month than they are in the rest of the season. But how those two do versus what Derrick Henry does, I haven't looked at the Ravens' early season schedule, but Derrick Henry's going to make noise. And if Pollard and Spears and the running game are not getting it done here, there's going to be a lot of trepidation about Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry would not have fit this offense in any way, shape, or form. And I think most smart Titans fans knew and came to terms with the fact, even before Callahan was hired, that whatever the Titans did next was not going to be suited to Derrick Henry, that the Titans needed to modernize the offense, and it was going to be different, and it wasn't going to be different with Derrick Henry. But boy, would it benefit Brian Callahan if Spears and Pollard have a nice start.
And some of this, you can watch your scouting stuff over at paulkarski.com with Blake. I think Latham is going to have moments where he looks like a rookie left tackle in pass pro. I just think that's going to happen, and Skoronski to some degree as well. But if you get him downhill in a running game with a running back who's quick and knows where to go, I think they can be pretty effective early. So I'm excited about the running game, and I think they're going to find a lot of work there. Ravens will play the Chiefs, of course, on Thursday night, so that's a big one. Good defense there on the road, Super Bowl champs, etc. But they host the Raiders the next week, so that should be opportunity for Derek. At the Cowboys in week 3, another tough matchup there. The Bills at home. So 3 of their top 4 are against very, very good football teams. And then they're at the Bengals the following week. So it's not an easy start for the Ravens to see what they do. So, but you're right. It's not important. It doesn't matter. But if they struggle and Derrick Henry's good, there's going to be narratives that'll float to the surface of talking heads like us, and opposite as well. If Pollard and Spears are doing very well and the Ravens struggle to run the football, or Derrick Henry, let's say, is like an 8 to 10 touch guy, which is possible in that offense, it's gonna float to the surface, and people are going to talk about it, even if it's not.
People will be giving Rand the chef's hat. Believe in Rand, or what was and J-Rob we trust. It's too fast with that stuff.
So here's the real question, and this is Gus answers. This is a perfect segue, Gus. I do appreciate this. The short passing game will be an extension of the running game.
Absolutely.
All right. So Will Levis completes 99 out of 100 passes in preseason football. I don't have sources, but that's the numbers I'm seeing. I am so fascinated with your opinion of processing and accuracy are a big thing for what Brian Callahan wanted to accomplish with Will Levis. I do think he has gotten better in camp, and I do think he's better in games than he is in practice. The only real big throw he has made in any of the 2 preseason games he played on any of the 4 drives was the throw to Ridley, where it does look like he sort of last minute comes off a read and finds him, which is an excellent, you want to see his processing and accuracy work there, which it did. But otherwise, almost every single one of his completions was, fairly short and fairly quick. That's a good thing. But how do you balance being good at that versus what the next step needs to look like for the quarterback, which is you actually do have to push the ball down the field at some point if you're going to be Will Levis.
Well, they're relying on the fact that he's done it before. So they say they know he can do it, which he can. Hopkins hasn't been there. I know he's not going to catch the ball over his shoulder a whole lot going down the sideline, but he can make deep plays in tight windows. We know that, and he's super reliable. I do have some concerns after the practice week with Seattle about Ridley, and I kind of led with this last week. He got swallowed up by Reek Woolen of the Seahawks, 6'5", lanky corner. You're not going to see too many guys like that. He had 6 interceptions in his rookie year 2 years ago. But he not only covered him effectively, it seemed to get in his head. Then you had the quote where he said he didn't run fast and his energy was down. Joe Rexrode going on with him in the morning was like, well, he kind of, that sounds like an excuse that he used in lieu of something. No, I don't care whether it's an excuse or whatever. It's a terrible thing to hear from your speedy top $50 million guaranteed wide receiver that he's claiming that he didn't run hard. I want him running hard all the time. I don't want a guy who's going to tell me, well, I'll turn the switch on when the time comes. I don't want to hear that. And then Teron Davenport's working on a story about how guys deal with pressure. And in a lot of context, he mentioned, well, my contract's guaranteed. I don't want a guy to be reminding us of that either. I want the guy with the guaranteed contract to be playing like every dollar's on the line. I understood it took them some time to get in sync, Levis and Ridley, and they struggled with it, and then they found it, and then it went away again. And that concerns me. And look, Ridley going sideways has been fine, right? He's catching slants and crossers and taking the ball full speed and getting good yardage with it. And all that stuff's fine. It's the strictly vertical stuff where he's catching stuff over his shoulder or over his head that hasn't been working, that we haven't seen work. Is it a major alarm? No. But would you like to see that stuff clicking in practice instead of saying it's going to come in the game and I'm confident it's going to work? I don't want to hear that, because they're saying that's going to come, and they're saying Snead and Woozy, playing after 3 days of practice in a game and being effective, that's going to come. And you don't want too much stuff that's going to come for a team with a first-year head coach and a lot of turnover and all of that. So is there room for a little bit of concern there? Sure.
And one of the deep shots he missed in the practice against Seattle wasn't necessarily that he wasn't running hard. It's that he just screwed it up. He turned around on his wrong shoulder, and he just made a bad play. So,
but you got John Gall in here, your nephew, saying he's not a robot. He can't run 100% every play in practice. Yeah, most guys run 100% every play in practice. That's what they do.
It's meritocracy.
Yeah, I mean, why can't he? You're expecting him to run 100% every play in a game, right? And in a game, he might conceivably play 9 out of 10 plays on a series. In practice, he's asked to play 5 plays in a row. And for those 5 plays in a row, I want him to run 100% every play. And guess what? So do his coaches. They do.
I agree with you. That said, and this is the weird dichotomy of practice and camp versus preseason games versus regular season games, is that the two most interesting and exciting plays that happened with the first team offense in all the 3 preseason games were passes to Calvin Ridley. So the pass and run, the catch and run with the yak in the first game, and then of course the middle crosser there against the Saints. Those are the two sort of best plays. I know there was a Pollard run off right tackle and a couple of screen plays that were really nice. Not with the first team offense. I'm not talking about Bryce Oliver deep shots with Malik Willis or whatever. So, but those two. I mean, look, I think it's worth putting a little like mark next to and saying keep an eye on it.
Exactly.
Otherwise, I think Ridley is still the best player. Now, here's the other thing. I also think fans in general get too caught up with speed equaling deep, and that's something that doesn't always like DeAndre Hopkins might be the best deep threat on the team because he's just great at making plays on the ball.
He's not, though. He's not the best deep threat on the
team. No.
I'm
just
in this instance, speed should equal deep, because they haven't had a guy who runs like Calvin Ridley. Now, it doesn't have to equal deep completions, but he does have to equal deep coverage and threat. And that's something the Titans haven't had in a long time. Somebody to take the top off of defense, and that's part of why he's getting $50 billion.
Yeah, guaranteed. No, that's absolutely true. All right, so anything else from the defense? I don't have as much, because I think you're going to see Denard Wilson sort of have to work with what he's got, and we've already talked about lack of depth along with outside linebacker. He's got all these safeties he's going to have to work in. You got the injuries at middle linebacker. You've got really good corners if they're healthy. I think Denard Wilson sort of just has to work with what he's got, and they were really bad last year. I think they're going to be an average to below average defense, but mostly based on personnel. If T'Vondre Sweat is a great player, then they can overcome some of those problems pretty fast with him and Simmons up front. But the offense and their development and the processing for Will Levis is ultimately going to be the thing that we all talk about at the end of the year. So
we really, really haven't seen the defense because Simmons hasn't played and Landry. So there's 2/4 of your pass rush, your 4-man pass rush, and the 2 best guys probably haven't seen them. And you haven't seen the 2 starting corners who are going to have a big bearing on the pass rush and on the coverage. So without those 4 guys, having a real read on things is largely impossible. And we haven't seen the corners at practice on any regular, so 1 day of a woozy, half day maybe.
Yep.
And Snead's practiced maybe 2-3 times.
Yeah.
So we don't have a feel, and we're not going to have a feel because practices now will be scaled back, and we're only going to see stretch and a positional period going forward. So curtain raiser in Chicago is a real curtain raiser.
And I do think it's interesting. Like Caleb Williams being a rookie is a positive for this unit here. But they've added a lot of talent in there from an offensive skill standpoint. They also have a really good secondary as well, which matches up with the Titans, the way they've spent money and invested as well. So I think it's a good challenge for them in week 1. I honestly wouldn't be surprised at almost any outcome, to be honest with you.
No, I think it's one of the better games on the board. And I think, which will make it fun, because I think nationally everybody thinks the Bears are going to roll by double digits in that game in Caleb Williams' debut, and I don't expect it to go like that. I don't know that Titans necessarily going to win it, but I expect them to be competitive.
I think it opened as like a 4.5 point Bears spread. I don't know what it's at right now, so I'll be interested to see where that finishes. All right. So I know you had a chance to talk about this. First of all, how about this? Tell everybody what you got on the website, the podcast, what you guys are going to be doing. Where can people follow you? All that good stuff. Tell everybody that.
Well, today I have Blake Bedingfield's review of the best and worst things he saw out of the final preseason game. Some observations about some specific guys. His review of the screens that we've been talking about and what it kind of recalls for him around the league and from Cincinnati. A short piece about the loss of Chase Campbell, and then tomorrow I'll be tracking cuts. We'll see. I only chase a couple of the key people, but things will drip out during the day. And then at 3:00 Central, we'll round up the whole thing and review the whole roster. And then Wednesday, they'll be back out on the field again, and we'll have some kind of availability Wednesday and Thursday to talk to people. I thought it was interesting, and I'll probably write it Wednesday morning. When they get together Wednesday, it really goes from 91 to 69 or 70 with the practice squatters there. It still feels drastically different. You go out there and you look at the guys on the field, and it feels smaller. Plus, all of a sudden, there's no rope up around the field. There's no bleachers there. There's no fans coming. The whole thing feels smaller and compressed. And I asked Callahan today about that. And he talked about, he does re-message, and even though there'll be some roster turnover, there is kind of a, hey, this is us now, and we're going forward with this, and it kind of rebrands the group. It's a very interesting day, that first day after cuts, when it's a smaller, tighter group. Also, sometimes it's the first day reporters are in the locker room, like things kind of change. We may not be in the locker room for a week. I don't know if we will be or won't be, but it's kind of a graduation day almost.
Yeah, it really is. It's definitely interesting. I've been part of a couple of them, not nearly as many as you, but it's certainly interesting. And it's this is a kind of a tough question to answer, so I'm curious what your perspective is, because you've been around all the different head coaches for the entire time. Time changes and the game changes and it evolves, and so things are different in the NFL in general. But I'm curious if you were to compare and contrast Brian Callahan's first camp with any of the other first camps you remember, or even Vrabel's camps, or Wisenhunt's camps, or Fisher's camps. Like, do you have anything that you noticed that from an insight perspective? Because again, I can compare Vrabel, but I didn't start covering this team until 2016, 2017. So I don't have much institutional knowledge before that. I'm just curious, what kind of camp was this through your eyes?
I just said two things broadly, compared to back at the beginning. It's just so much easier. I mean, they have two padded practices on consecutive days, and then they've got a walkthrough practice that's much easier. And that padded practice, the longest one was 2.5 hours, but that was a huge surprise when it was long that way. It's just the way of the league now. It's not a brutal thing to go through. I'm not saying it's not hard, but when I covered the 96 Oilers in Houston, there were 2.5 hour practices, and they weren't scheduling the first one. If they were scheduling the first one at 7:30 or 8:30 in the morning, it was only to spread the two apart. It wasn't because they wanted to avoid the heat. They embraced the heat. Also, this was a very mild training camp in terms of the weather, which I don't know, Brian Callahan didn't necessarily love it. But these guys have it incredibly easy compared to their forefathers. And that has nothing to do with the way a coach is running.
Right.
And the other thing, I wrote about this early, and a lot of it's guys maturing. A guy like Dylan Radins, who has been through a hard time. It's not his fault that he was overdrafted, but he didn't live up to the expectations, and he's kind of survived that. But he's one of a lot of guys who talked about it being a lot less stressful of an environment. And I think some of that's because there are a lot of guys who have matured, but I also think a lot of it's Vrabel versus Callahan. And Callahan said early on he wanted guys to be happy to walk into the door every day coming to work. And I don't think Vrabel gave that a lot of consideration. I don't think in New England you've heard plenty of Patriots players talk about the misery of going to work, and the ring and the Lombardi Trophy being the giant payoff in exchange for how rough it was, and the huge payoff for how much of a struggle it was. Now, good football teams have a struggle, and football is hard. And Brian Callahan and these guys said, it's not that we're not going to be stressed or go through stress, but the general vibe is less stressful than it was under Vrabel. And Vrabel wasn't as bad as a lot of people envisioned, but I don't think he minded guys feeling some dread sometimes coming to work. And I think Callahan wants to minimize that largely.
And the only way to ever tell if that's the right approach or if it works is when you face a difficult stretch, you face adversity, that culture you have begun to build is the thing that holds up in those moments of adversity. Like, that's the thing you're trying to build, is something that sustains through all that stuff. And there's just no way to tell until you're actually in it and actually facing it, if it's going to hold up or not. And so we shall see. We shall see. We got a couple of weeks here, though, to before we have to make any sort of official predictions about the team. So we got lots of time to discuss that and get on board that across all the great shows on the 440 Sports Network, Paul Kuharsky podcast, Music City Audible, the Hot Read podcast now with Stoney Keeley and JT starting next week. Of course, you've got SEC Football Live on Wednesdays at 3:00 with myself and Stephen Godfrey. And you've got, of course, the Gold Standard podcast on Wednesday covering the Preds. They're going to have a great training camp opening up here in a couple of weeks. Lots of excitement around that franchise as well. And, of course, a football show here on Mondays at 3 p.m. Okay, I watched the Steve McNair documentary over the weekend. And I know, speaking of the 1996 Houston Oilers, by the way, what's interesting is I think it's probably good for a lot of new Nashvillians to relive the 99 season and just sort of recount exactly what actually happened and what that team did and what they meant. And I thought Brad Hopkins did a pretty good job sort of articulating a lot of that stuff. But that's all stuff that most Titans fans, if you are a big-time fan, you kind of already know. I know you talked about this on your show, so go back and listen if you haven't. But I'm just the timeline with which, and I know you mentioned this is the only thing that I thought I learned, and I don't know what you think about this, but the timeline with which the whole thing happened was pretty eye-opening to me. We know that this is a young woman who had she was dealing with some trouble and just some drama and just some issues from a personal standpoint. But to go from DUI to texting the guy that's going to get him the gun in a matter of like 8 hours, and then having the weapon and then committing the heinous acts according to the police reports, and to getting it all turned around, it does sort of lead me to think like, all right, this whole time, all this noise around what could have been is probably just that. It's probably just noise. And that the most logical explanation is the explanation we've had all along. And while it was well done, I don't think it answered a lot of questions. I don't love how it ended with like, here's a conspiracy theory. Like, here's a conspiracy theory. Do with that what you will. Talk to you later. I don't know. I don't know if you have anything else to add after sitting on it for a couple of days.
Yeah, well, the conspiracy theorist, the private investigator who's gotten a lot of run over the years for his question, asks a legitimate question about her relationship with the guy who sold her the gun, who she had a lot of text exchanges with, that they seem to have had a romantic relationship. And, the conspiracy theory is that maybe this guy did the killings. But there's not a great deal of evidence. The police did seemingly botch their interview with him by not getting him alone. So they talked to him with his girlfriend of the day, and he wasn't going to admit anything in front of her about his relationship with the killer.
That seems like a flawed system but either way, okay.
Not good. But what is this guy, Vincent Hill, what is his motive in all of this? He's written a couple books about it. It seems like he wanted to make his name on unraveling Nashville Metro Police's case and conclusions on the Steve McNair murder. Beyond that, doesn't seem to flash many credentials, which is what the police said about him. I'm an Occam's razor guy. The most logical, sensible conclusion is usually the right conclusion. He's chirping about this for 20 some years now. And it seems like it's all he's got, and I don't really understand his motives or why he's got credibility in this outside of raising one good, interesting point. that leaves you where the documentary kind of wanted to leave you, like saying, okay, I see all this stuff, and now I have a question, which is what they set everybody up for. And I kind of agreed with Jeff Fisher, like, yeah, you might have a question, but in the end, we're beyond time where you just have to accept everything.
I don't know how much you remember of the Christmas Day bombing that happened in downtown in, I guess it was 2020. And the police had gone to this gentleman's house and knocked on the door and asked a question, and didn't get any of the answers they kind of needed to continue the investigation, and kind of moved along past him. And they had been kind of warned that this is a guy that they should have checked on, and they kind of screwed that up. And I say that to offer context that, like, the police department has done this more than just one time. They're people too. They make mistakes, and certainly not following up with a more pointed line of questioning to the guy who, delivered the murder weapon is probably something they should have done. But it doesn't mean that there is some vast network of conspiracies that are taking place to cover something up. I will say this. I don't know if you noticed this, and maybe I'm wrong. And the very first scene with the guy who owns the condo, where he explains, I don't know if that's been out before, where he explains walking into the condo for the first time
and walking out.
But he said he walked in and got a beer. Like, what are we talking about? You're gonna walk past two bodies to get a beer in the fridge? Like, that one kind of threw me for a loop at the beginning there. I don't know if you.
That was weird. That was weird. Wayne.
Like, what? That makes no sense to me. And that's like where I'm kind of like, wait a second. And then and here's also for the record, we as human beings are prone to conspiracy theories in general. We are wired to sort of think that stuff's interesting. We've been that way for all of humankind. It's been that way for hundreds of years in human society. We are wired to think through and be attracted to conspiracy theories in general. So I agree. The most logical explanation is a troubled young person was hurt and in a tough situation, got a weapon and did something that I assume that most people regret in a very, very heinous way. So.
Along the lines of the opening the beer, I just heard some short thing about Chappaquiddick this morning. Here's a general piece of advice. When something goes badly, just call the police. Like right away, call the police. Don't wait. Ted Kennedy had no business waiting.
Yeah.
And these two people that were first on the scene of the McNair murders had no business waiting. Oh my God. Call, boom, 911. 911. You can't go wrong calling 911 too early, but you can go wrong calling 911 too late.
There you go. Life lessons and advice from Paul Kuharsky, of course, at paulkuharsky.com and the Paul Kuharsky podcast. All right. Anything else you've got for the great folks here?
That's it. Tune in. I'll be back on Thursday after the Titans are on the field for 2 more days and after cuts. So there'll be a lot of new stuff for us to get in and dig into. Appreciate all of you that came to watch, and we'll watch this after the fact. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So thank you guys all for listening and for watching. Give us a subscription there. Turn on the notifications as well, because we're going to have shows for you all up and down the dial every day covering the Titans, as well as SEC and college football. Going to be an exciting year in college football with the 12-team playoff and a whole new, no Nick Saban, a lot of new in the SEC. So make sure you tune into that product as well. Paul Kuharsky podcast, Music City Audible, Hot Read. We've got you covered, man. SEC Football Live, Gold Standard, everything in Nashville from a football standpoint. We've got you. And thank you to our great and amazing sponsor, Sinkers Beverages, for supporting us. Go buy your booze from them. Support them. They're a great local company as well. So other than that, thanks, PK, for hanging out. You can get to him at Paul Kuharsky NFL. You can get to me at Braden Gall. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching, and we will talk to you guys next time.